I still remember the exact sound, not the slap, not the shouting, not even the gasps that rippled through the courtroom months later. What I remember was the silence. The kind of silence that settles over a room when everyone suddenly realizes they may have believed the wrong person. I have presided over thousands of cases during my years on the bench. I've seen liars who could cry on command. I've seen innocent people appear guilty because fear made them stumble over their words. I've seen careers destroyed in a single afternoon and reputations restored after years of suffering. But this case was different because from the moment the police officer walked into my courtroom, she expected to win. And from the moment the elderly woman stepped inside, she expected to lose. That contrast stayed with me. The officer stood tall, confident, immaculate in appearance. Every movement was controlled. Every answer sounded rehearsed. She carried herself with the certainty of someone accustomed to being believed. The elderly woman sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, 72 years old, small frame, silver hair. Simple clothing, hands trembling slightly as she folded them in her lap. Her name was Evelyn Brooks. At first glance, she looked like somebody's grandmother waiting for a church service to begin. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw something else. Exhaustion. The exhaustion that comes from being humiliated publicly. The exhaustion that comes from fighting a battle everyone tells you cannot be won. And most importantly, the exhaustion of carrying a truth nobody seems willing to hear. The dispute appeared simple on paper. Officer Rebecca Collins had issued Evelyn a citation carrying a substantial financial penalty. According to the officer's report, Evelyn had violated municipal regulations, become aggressive during questioning, and refused lawful instructions. The documentation was detailed, neat, professional, convincing. If someone had reviewed only the paperwork, the outcome would have seemed obvious. But courts are not supposed to decide cases based on paperwork alone. They are supposed to decide based on facts. And facts have a strange habit of hiding beneath appearances. As proceedings began, I watched both women carefully. One thing decades on the bench teaches you is that words matter less than behavior. People reveal themselves in moments they believe nobody is watching. This officer never looked at Evelyn. Not once. That immediately caught my attention. Most people glance at the person accusing them. They show anger, annoyance, frustration, something. Officer Collins behaved as if Evelyn wasn't even in the room. Psychologically, that's fascinating. When people completely dismiss another human being's presence, it often reveals more than outright hostility. It suggests superiority, and superiority can be dangerous. Especially when authority is involved. The officer's attorney opened first. His argument was polished. He emphasized experience, training, professional conduct, years of public service. He painted Officer Collins as a dedicated servant of the community, unfairly targeted by someone dissatisfied with receiving a lawful citation. The presentation was effective. Several spectators nodded along. Even some members of the audience appeared convinced. Then Evelyn's turn came. She stood slowly. For a moment, I thought she might not even speak. Her hands shook visibly. Her voice cracked. And that's where many people make a critical mistake. They confuse nervousness with dishonesty. In reality, truthful people often become emotional because they're reliving real pain. Liars usually rehearse. Truthful people remember. There is a difference. Evelyn looked directly at me. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I've been afraid of this day." The courtroom became still. She continued, "I was afraid nobody would believe me." Those words weren't dramatic. They weren't crafted for sympathy. They sounded genuine, and genuine statements carry a weight that rehearsed speeches rarely match. Paid him. She described what happened. She had been walking home from a neighborhood grocery store, a routine afternoon, nothing unusual, nothing remarkable. Then Officer Collins approached. What followed, according to Evelyn, escalated almost immediately. Questions became accusations. Accusations became hostility. Hostility became humiliation. Then came the moment that changed everything. Evelyn alleged that the officer slapped her. Publicly, without justification, several people in the courtroom shifted in their seats. The accusation was serious, extremely serious. Officer Collins showed no visible reaction. That interested me. Not because innocent people always react dramatically. They don't. But most individuals confronted with a false allegation of physical assault display some emotional response, shock, disbelief, outrage, something. Officer Collins remained perfectly calm, almost too calm. Then Evelyn made another claim. The citation itself, she insisted, had been fabricated afterward, invented, created to justify what had happened. The room immediately filled with quiet whispers. Now we weren't discussing a misunderstanding. We were discussing potential abuse of authority, potential falsification, potential misconduct. The stakes had changed completely. I called for order. Silence returned. The defense attacked quickly. They highlighted inconsistencies, minor timing differences, small memory gaps. The sort of discrepancies common when someone recalls a stressful event months later. Jurors often misunderstand this aspect of human psychology. Perfect memories are usually fictional. Real memories contain imperfections. Trauma doesn't create flawless recollection. It often creates fragmented recollection. Still, the defense pressed aggressively. And for a while, it worked. Evelyn appeared overwhelmed. Her confidence began to crumble. She struggled to answer rapidly delivered questions. Several spectators seemed to lose faith in her account. I could feel momentum shifting, and Officer Collins knew it. For the first time all day, she smiled, just slightly, a tiny expression barely noticeable. But I noticed, judges notice everything. That smile bothered me. Not because smiling is wrong, because of when it happened. It appeared not after evidence was presented, not after truth emerged, but after an elderly woman became visibly distressed. That distinction matters. A lot. Then the defense introduced the official report, page after page, tailed descriptions, professional language, chronological explanations. On its face, it appeared devastating to Evelyn's case. The attorney practically glowed while presenting it. He believed the matter was over. Frankly, many people in the courtroom seemed to agree. Then I asked a simple question. One question. A question nobody else had considered important. Officer Collins, when exactly did you complete this report? The answer came instantly. Instantly, immediately following the incident. Confident, certain. No hesitation. Yet something felt wrong. Years on the bench create instincts. Instincts aren't evidence, but they tell you where to look for evidence. I requested additional documentation testament records. Internal processing logs, supporting material. The officer's attorney objected, not aggressively, just enough to signal discomfort. That caught my attention too, because if documents support your case, you usually welcome scrutiny. Hours later, new records arrived. I remember studying them carefully, line by line, dot by date, time by time. The courtroom waited. The spectators leaned forward. Even Evelyn seemed afraid to hope, and then I found it. A tiny inconsistency, one small discrepancy, insignificant to most people, massive to a judge. The official report had not been created when Officer Collins claimed. It had been modified later. Significantly later, the courtroom atmosphere changed instantly. You could feel it. Like pressure building before a storm, I looked toward Officer Collins for the first time all day. She looked nervous, just for a second. But it was enough, because confidence is easy when your story remains unchallenged. The real test comes when facts start fighting back. I asked another question, then another, then another. Each answer created a new problem. Each explanation raised a larger question, and slowly the carefully constructed narrative began to crack. Not collapse, not yet, but crack. And as those cracks spread, an entirely different picture started emerging. A picture nobody in that courtroom expected, including me, because hidden inside a piece of evidence everyone had overlooked was something that threatened to destroy Officer Collins' entire story. Something that would turn the trial upside down, something that would trigger one of the most explosive courtroom moments I have ever witnessed. And the moment I realized what that evidence contained, I understood that this case was never about a citation. It was never about a fine. It wasn't even about a slap. It was about something much darker, something far more deliberate. And if what I suspected was true, Officer Collins wasn't merely hiding the truth. She had built an entire lie around it. The moment I saw that piece of evidence, I stopped taking notes. For a judge, that's rare. Most people imagine judges constantly writing. In reality, when something truly important emerges, you stop writing and start watching, because the reactions become more valuable than the words. I looked across the courtroom. Officer Rebecca Collins sat perfectly still, too still. Her attorney had no idea what I had just noticed. Evelyn Brooks looked exhausted, unaware that the entire case was about to change. And the spectators, they sensed something. Human beings are remarkably good at detecting shifts in tension. Nobody knew why the atmosphere had changed. They only knew it had. The overlooked evidence was not dramatic. It wasn't a hidden video. It wasn't a surprise witness bursting through the doors. It wasn't some cinematic revelation. It was a timestamp. A boring little digital timestamp attached to an internal police record, but the law is often decided by boring details. That's something television rarely shows. Truth doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives disguised as paperwork. The report Officer Collins claimed to have completed immediately after the incident had actually undergone substantial edits hours later, not minor corrections. Not spelling fixes. Entire sections had been added, descriptions had been expanded, statements had appeared that were absent from the original version. That fact alone was concerning. But what came next was devastating. I requested every available version of the report. The courtroom waited while the records were displayed. The first version appeared on the evidence screen. Short, sibilant, incomplete. Then the second version appeared. Gasps echoed through the room. Entire paragraphs had materialized. Critical allegations against Evelyn existed only in the later version. The accusation that she had become aggressive, added later. The claim that she refused instructions, added later. The language used to justify the citation, added later. I watched Officer Collins carefully. People think lies are exposed by dramatic confessions. Usually they're exposed by stress. The human brain struggles to maintain fabricated narratives under pressure. Small cracks appear, microexpressions emerge. Confidence fades. For the first time, Officer Collins broke eye contact. Then I asked the question she clearly hadn't prepared for. If these events occurred exactly as described, why were they absent from your original report? Silence 5 seconds, 10 seconds. An eternity inside a courtroom. Her attorney shifted in his seat. Officer Collins cleared her throat. Then she offered an explanation that sounded reasonable at first. She claimed she had simply remembered additional details later. That happens. Witnesses sometimes remember things. Officers sometimes supplement reports. The explanation might have worked, if not for one problem, a very big problem. Because hidden within the department records was evidence showing exactly when those additions occurred and exactly what happened immediately before they were added. I ordered the next exhibit displayed. The courtroom became silent again. A communication log appeared on the screen. Officer Collins stared at it, and the color drained from her face. I knew at that moment we were getting close to the truth. The log revealed that before the report was expanded, a formal complaint had been filed by Evelyn. The timing was devastating. The original report existed first. Then Evelyn filed a misconduct complaint. Then suddenly the report grew new accusations, new justifications, new claims. The sequence mattered. In law, timing often reveals motive. And motive changes everything. The spectators began whispering. Jurors exchanged glances. Even the defense attorney looked uneasy. For months, the narrative had been simple. An experienced officer versus an elderly woman, authority versus accusation. Now the narrative looked very different. Now it appeared possible that the report had been altered after the officer realized her conduct might be investigated. That possibility hung over the courtroom like a storm cloud. But the biggest revelation was still waiting, because during discovery, Evelyn's legal team had uncovered something nobody expected. Something Officer Collins never thought would surface: a witness. Not just any witness, an independent witness. Someone with no connection to Evelyn, no reason to lie, no personal stake in the outcome. A retired school principal named Harold Bennett, 78 years old, respected throughout the community, quiet, reserved, the kind of man who chooses his words carefully. When he entered the courtroom, nobody paid much attention. That changed within minutes. Mr. Bennett testified that he had been sitting in his parked vehicle near the scene. He saw the interaction. He saw the confrontation. And then he said the words that changed everything. "I saw the officer strike her." The courtroom exploded. People gasped. Some stood halfway from their seats. The bailiff immediately called for order. Officer Collins looked as though she'd been hit by lightning. Her attorney objected instantly, aggressively, desperately. But the testimony continued. Mr. Bennett described the encounter in extraordinary detail. Not because he had memorized it, because it had disturbed him. Traumatic events imprint themselves differently. His account matched Evelyn's version in critical areas, not perfectly. No genuine witness accounts ever match perfectly, but the core facts aligned, and that alignment mattered. Then came the viral courtroom moment people still talk about, the moment nobody could have scripted. The defense attempted to discredit Mr. Bennett. They questioned his memory, his age, his ability to observe. The strategy seemed logical until Mr. Bennett calmly reached into his coat pocket and produced something nobody expected: a notebook. At first, it looked insignificant, but then he explained for 30 years as a school principal, he kept daily notes every day, without exception. Including that day, his handwritten entry had been created within minutes of witnessing the incident, long before lawsuits, long before investigations, long before anyone knew there would be a court case. The entry described exactly what he saw: an officer striking an elderly woman. The date matched, the time matched, the location matched, and suddenly every attack on his memory collapsed. The spectators erupted again. Even after years on the bench, I could feel the emotional shock spreading through the room. Officer Collins looked defeated. But there was one final piece, one final truth, and it came from her own department. 10 investigators had quietly reviewed the incident months earlier. They discovered discrepancies, concerns, questions about the evolving report, questions about procedural violations, questions that had never been fully answered. Now those findings were entered into evidence, one after another, each one tightening the net, each one weakening her credibility, until eventually there was nowhere left to hide. Then something happened that I will never forget. Officer Collins stopped fighting, not dramatically, not with tears, not with a confession. She simply lowered her head and stayed silent. Sometimes silence says more than words. The courtroom understood, so did I, because by then the evidence had become overwhelming, the fabricated allegations. The altered report, the independent witness, the handwritten notes, the internal findings. Taken individually, each piece raised questions. Taken together, they told a story, A story of power misused. A story of someone who believed authority would protect them from accountability. A story of an elderly woman who was expected to stay quiet, expected to give up, expected to disappear. Instead, she fought. When the time came for my ruling, the courtroom was completely silent. I looked at Evelyn Brooks, then I looked at Officer Collins, and I thought about something I have learned over many years. The law cannot erase humiliation. It cannot erase fear. It cannot erase the memory of being treated as though your voice doesn't matter. But it can do one thing. It can acknowledge the truth. I ruled in Evelyn's favor. Completely, the citation was invalidated. The allegations against her were rejected. The findings were entered into the record. And the misconduct evidence was referred to the appropriate authorities for further action. Evelyn began to cry, not loudly, not dramatically. Quiet tears, the kind that come when a burden finally lifts. Many people assume court victories are moments of celebration. Often they are moments of relief. This was one of those moments. As spectators left the courtroom, I remained seated for several minutes, thinking. Because this case wasn't really about race alone, or age, or even authority. It was about something deeper. The danger that arises whenever one person believes another person's dignity matters less than their own. That belief destroys trust. It destroys institutions, and eventually it destroys the person who embraces it. Officer Collins entered that courtroom believing her badge would outweigh the truth. Evelyn entered believing the truth might never matter. In the end, both women were wrong because badges are not stronger than facts. And truth, however delayed, has a way of finding daylight. That is the lesson I carried from this case. Never assume power makes someone right. Never assume vulnerability makes someone wrong. And never underestimate the courage of a person who has nothing left to protect except the truth. I have presided over thousands of cases. Most fade from memory. This one never will, because on that day, justice did more than settle a dispute. It reminded everyone in that courtroom, including me, that character is revealed not by how people treat the powerful, but by how they treat those they think nobody will defend. And thankfully, on that day, the truth found its defender.